This is Right to Life Radio, a production of Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Girardi.
Well, it took Congress a little bit of time to pick a new speaker for the House of Representatives, something that probably did not impact anyone in the United States of America and probably nobody in the greater Fresno area, I guess, other than Kevin McCarthy. However, they finally did pick a speaker, and the new Republican majority in the House of Representatives has already started trying to pass various kinds of pro-life resolutions and bills, and that makes me quite happy. It makes me quite happy that that's going to be a priority right at the start of the new Congress. I know none of these things have any chance of passing due to the fact that Democrats control the Senate, but at the very least, it's good to get started. So let's talk about it. And I want to talk a little bit about the broader issue, a solo version of Right to Life Radio today, by the way. Jonathan Keller is gallivanting in New York City, so having the time of his life, as always. I want, though, to start by looking at some of the stuff that Congress has done and to talk about the sort of wishy-washy attitude I'm seeing from some members of Congress and what we can look forward to seeing from this Congress as we get started. So for those who didn't sort of follow the story the last few weeks, Kevin McCarthy had been the minority leader for the Republicans in the House of Representatives throughout basically from whenever it was that Paul Ryan stepped down. I guess that was in 2018 or 2019 that Paul Ryan stepped down. McCarthy has been the leader of the Republicans in the House of Representatives since then. He was the minority leader. It was kind of presumed he was going to be the presumptive pick for the Republicans if they took the majority in the 2022 elections. He was the presumptive pick to be the new Speaker of the House of Representatives. And that kind of hit a roadblock. And that roadblock was about you need, a certain number of votes to be the Speaker. You need the majority of all the people in the House of Representatives to be the Speaker. And the Republican majority is only about 10 votes large. And there were about 20 Republicans who said, we don't want Kevin McCarthy as Speaker unless he does this, this, or this. So that kind of delayed the activity of the House of Representatives by approximately a week. It took about 5 days of voting and horse trading and negotiating for McCarthy to get enough of those 20 holdouts to vote for him in order for him to be confirmed as Speaker and for the House to begin its business. A lot of people were trying to comment that this was incredibly embarrassing. I don't know. I didn't think it was that embarrassing. I mean, he didn't have enough votes. He needed to negotiate. People needed to debate and vote on stuff. That's kind of what the House of Representatives is for. Anyway, now that that is all settled, the House has started getting into its legislative business, and two of the first things the House of Representatives did was introduce first a resolution to condemn the attacks on pro-life pregnancy resource centers, pro-life clinics, and various churches that have taken place in this country over the last year, really since May 2nd, which was the day that the draft of Justice Alito's majority decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health got leaked. So on May 2nd, in a shocking thing, because you never see leaked draft Supreme Court decisions. I've never seen that. I've never heard of that happening. Some person who worked for the court engaged in a massive sort of betrayal of trust. Basically the entire majority draft of the entire draft of the majority opinion in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization got leaked to the press. And it was actually really remarkable when the actual decision in Dobbs came out about 7 weeks later, that it was almost verbatim the same between the initial leak and the final decision. There were a couple of extra things added to the final decision, responding to some of the concurrences and dissents, but everything that was in the draft was in the final decision. When that got leaked, it set off this wave of vandalism and various kinds of threatening vandalism, pointedly, ideological vandalism directed at pro-life entities. And the two entities that seemed to get this the worst were pro-life organizations, pregnancy resource clinics, and pregnancy resource centers, and churches. And I know of there were a lot of Catholic churches and other churches that were hit with graffiti and stuff that says, if abortion isn't safe, you aren't either. All kinds of things. And there were like almost 100 different facilities, groups, or churches that experienced some form of vandalism in the weeks following the release of the draft opinion in early May, and then the release of the actual final opinion in late June. The House of Representatives at that time, though, was controlled by the Democrats, who just refused to join in with Republican efforts. Republicans wanted to issue a resolution condemning these acts of violence and intimidation, and the Democrats just sort of refused to do so. It's actually very frustrating to me that while there were almost no or very few reported acts of vandalism that occurred against abortion clinics, there were several arrests made by the FBI against pro-life activists, some of whom, in particular, I remember there was a story about this man from Pennsylvania who had gotten into some sort of argument with someone outside of an abortion clinic, this pro-life activist, who the local authorities had declined to press any kind of charges against him. But the FBI decided to show up at his house with like a whole bunch of FBI agents holding guns. The guy's kids are crying as he gets arrested. Sort of seems like a very disproportionate response, and it's all going in one certain direction. Anyway, the House of Representatives passed a resolution to condemn the recent attacks on pro-life facilities, groups, and churches. And it just sort of strikes me as bizarre that people wouldn't want to sign on to this. Why, even if you were pro-choice, you wouldn't want to sign on to this. And this resolution, it goes on for about 7 pages, listing all of these different times when churches and pro-life entities were vandalized. On May 8th, on Mother's Day, individuals attempted to break into the Oregon Right to Life office in Keyser, Oregon, reportedly igniting and throwing 2 Molotov cocktails at the building. May 8th, vandals spray-painted pro-abortion messages such as abortion is a right, and fake clinic and liars on the side of a pro-life pregnancy center in Manassas, Virginia. A pro-life nonprofit center in Madison, Wisconsin on May 8th was set ablaze and vandalized with the words, if abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either. It goes on and on and on and on. All these different instances, starting around the release of the Dobbs decision in early May, going all the way until October. And of course, a lot of people on the pro-choice side just refused to vote for this, which I just found to be astonishing. I mean, we on the pro-life side, I feel, have to engage in this. You know, there have been instances when pro-lifers have idiotically, stupidly engaged in violence or threats or whatever against abortion doctors or abortion clinics. And I feel like we on the pro-life side are scrupulous in condemning these things, saying this is a bad way to go about this. This is not going to solve anything. More violence is not going to solve an already violent situation. This is not the way to do this. We engage in this very stringent, you know, not even going to say self-flagellation, but we police these things within our own community, I think, pretty harshly. We say this is wrong. This is not the right way to go about it. Here are all of these instances where I feel like if the shoe were on the other foot and we had all these instances of pro-choice entities being firebombed, yeah, I'd join a resolution saying, yeah, pro-lifers should not do this and we condemn any acts of violence like this. But yet, here we are. So the House of Representatives passed this resolution. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't change the law or anything, but at the very least, it gets some pro-choice people on the record. It sort of, and I don't want to say because it doesn't do anything, it's meaningless. The kinds of I mean, that was one of my big arguments during when the Fresno City Council back about a year ago was wanting to pass this resolution honoring the anniversary of Roe v. Wade and honoring abortion rights, I was making the point that no, resolutions mean something. They have a meaning. That's why they're trying to do it. They are an expression of public morals. They're an expression of our public beliefs. And so we should actually push back against people who want to honor bad things or support bad things. So that was kind of a big deal. I mean, it was a big deal, but obviously it's limited, okay? We all know our schoolhouse rock. We all know, how does a bill become a law? I'm just a bill. Guess I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Republicans have control of the House of Representatives. They don't have control of the Senate, and they don't have control of the White House. There's going to be very few things they can actually practically do over the course of the next 2 years to actually advance the cause of life at the federal stage. Now, the other big bill that was passed in the House, and this passed 220 to 210 with one person abstaining, was the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. Now, this is, again, seems like something that should be uncontroversial. It's not even really an abortion bill. What the bill says is, if someone survives an attempted abortion, then that person should be given medical care and medical treatment. If you have this is now a baby who has been born, who has survived an attempted abortion, that person should be given the same kind of medical care and treatment and concern that you would give to a normal baby who was born. You don't give that person less treatment because they were unwanted or because they survived an attempted abortion. We're going to have Gianna Jessen come speak to us at Right to Life this upcoming March, who was in precisely that situation. She was someone who survived an attempted saline abortion, but survived it. This bill somehow got 210 members of the House of Representatives to vote against it. And the arguments were, quite silly. It was a bunch of Democrats yelling, "Oh, this is just a bunch of MAGA Republicans trying to take away women's reproductive rights and their reproductive right choices." At this point, this isn't in the reproductive rights discussion. At a certain point, this is about what are we doing with someone who has now been born? What are we going to do to care for this person who is now here, who is now born and outside of a womb, who by rights is now an American citizen and someone who is just as worthy of protection under law as, my 2-month-old son? So what are we going to do about this person? This bill is very straightforward. It just is sort of mandating, reinforcing at the federal level this requirement that this person receive the same kind of care that anyone else would. All right. Now, when we return, I'm going to talk about, here we have members of Congress all of a sudden voting for federal abortion legislation. The whole Republican caucus voting for federal abortion legislation. Is this a change of tune on some Republicans' parts? We'll discuss that next on Right to Life Radio. A production, as always, is Right to Life of Central California, rtlcc.org. Okay, shifting gears here. We're shifting a little bit away from the Republican Congress and the stuff they've been starting to do with the abortion issue. We've started to see the Republican Congress, after taking 5 days to vote for their speaker, they've introduced the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, which is a good piece of legislation. They passed a resolution condemning the violence against abortion clinics. And yet, these are really significant things. Abortion is this hugely significant question of fundamental justice. And yet, what was the big story this past week? What was the big story this past week that titillated all of talk radio over the past week, that even the John Girardi show scored some cheap points by talking about it? What was the story? It was the story about the federal government wanting to ban gas stoves. That was the story. And I promise I'm going to get to the attitude of congressional Republicans about voting for federal legislation next. But I wanted to dwell on this for a little bit. All right. look, for better or for worse, at the current moment, and this show, I should stress and reiterate, this is not a partisan show. We are a 501c3 organization at Right to Life. We don't endorse or oppose political candidates. What we care about is the abortion issue. We are not tied to the fortunes or failings of the Republican Party or, conservatives or blah, 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 blah. There are pro-life liberals out there. There are pro-life Democrats out there. We are very glad that they are out there. Fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, it depends on your point of view. At the moment, the political home for pro-lifers, for the most part, is within the Republican Party. The Republican Party, at least as its platform as part of its policy platform, says that abortion should be illegal. All right. So for better or for worse, that's where things are right now. And among conservatives and among Republicans, that's sort of where the pro-life community has some sort of a home. Is it the best home? Nope, not the best home. It's a home that needs some improvements. I wish conservatives cared more about abortion than they do about tax policy or, this, that, or the other. So again, this is doing a very elaborate 501c3 disclaimer here. One of the things that annoys me about certain people on the right is the way that they use the phrase culture war. This is a culture war issue. And it's often surrounds the use of the word woke, which I don't like the term woke anymore. I feel like it's now just a stand-in for thinking. It's sort of a stand-in for actually being able to define the problem that you might disagree with left-wing people about. And it at a certain point, it gets really overused, and it's often used by people who can't actually define what they think is objectionable about something from the left that they disagree with. This whole last week, we heard quite a bit about banning gas stoves, that there was some federal government consumer safety board who's one of their lead guys is this lawyer who is the son of a former AFL-CIO chief, who was saying maybe we should look into the possibility of banning gas stoves. They found one survey produced by an environmentalist group that was trying to make the connection between gas stove usage and childhood asthma, and trying to make the argument that a gas stove in the home is as bad for childhood asthma as kids inhaling secondhand smoke, having a smoker in the home. Now, this is one survey. We can talk all we want, whatever, about the provenance of it. But everyone on the right is, oh my gosh, this is a culture war from the left. This is the left attacking us on the culture war. Meanwhile, here's the House of Representatives voting on legislation about whether or not we should provide health care to babies who have survived an abortion, who are already born. Call me crazy. And God knows I love my gas stove. God knows you will pry that gas stove from my wife, Holly Girardi. You'll have to pry it out of her cold, dead hands first. She loves her gas stove. But is that really as important? No. And you will hear this phrase, culture war, thrown around about issues like that have nothing to do with the actual thing that I would say is much more fundamental to where our culture is going to go, like questions of human dignity. I mean, I guess if you really did the research and really found out that, hey, everyone who has a gas stove in their house is going to die of cancer, just like if you're smoking. All right, well, maybe we can have that public health discussion. It's not really going to the core of who we are as a culture. It's not going to the core of what we believe about the dignity and sanctity of the human person or our responsibilities to our fellow man. I can just see in my mind's eye annoying talking heads, like she's been a frequent subject of critique on this show, Tomi Lahren, who is a talking head on Fox News. I think she used to work for Glenn Beck, and then Glenn Beck fired her. She sort of came out as being a pro-choice conservative and advanced all these idiotic arguments about I thought conservatives believed in limited government. So why would you say that a government should tell you whether you can have an abortion or not? It's like, well, no. We think government should at least be big enough to say that people aren't allowed to commit acts of private violence against you. Okay? That's how big a government should be, to protect you from, attempts at violence against your life. That's how big the government should be. It's not advocating for big government to say that the police should stop someone who's trying to attack me. And I can just see in my mind's eye a certain sort of brand of conservative who is going to be really, really agitated about something silly like, taking away your gas stove, which God knows there's no way that that's going to happen. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe someone wants to try to take away gas stoves. I don't know. But there are definitely people who are going to be more upset about that than about all this pro-life stuff that's been happening. All right, when we return, we're going to really address this, the attitude of Republicans in Congress about passing national pro-life legislation. This is Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 AM 1400. With the House of Representatives starting up its work, and with Republicans in the House of Representatives already introducing nationwide legislation that sort of relates, at least tangentially, to the abortion issue. This is the Born Alive Infant Survivors Act, which basically says, hey, if a child survives an attempted abortion, you have to provide that child with basic health care. After this has been introduced, it is sort of making me, I guess, a little bit more hopeful about where the Republican Party stands as far as introducing nationwide abortion legislation. Now, Jonathan and I have been complaining about this really since the November election season last year, since the election season last year. We've been kind of complaining about this, certainly to each other and on air, that there are a number of Republicans who, after the Dobbs decision, have all of a sudden started running to this argument of, well, Congress shouldn't consider any abortion legislation because now it's a state's issue. Now it's an issue that goes to the states. And it was so funny how for years and years and years and years, various kinds of elected officials would try to get away from an abortion discussion by saying, well, abortion's a federal issue. It's not up to the states to decide. Now, as soon as Roe v. Wade, you're going to see federal officials say, well, it's not a federal issue anymore. Now it's up for the states to decide. Yeah. All of these politicians, for some reason, kind of sound like my Mitch McConnell impersonation. And during election season, specifically, a couple of people refused to talk about the abortion issue in very concrete terms as far as what federal legislation they would or wouldn't support, or whether they would support any federal legislation at all. All of a sudden, Mitch McConnell, who for his entire career in the Senate, when Congress really couldn't do almost anything about the abortion issue, they were able to abolish partial birth abortion at the federal level only after, a change in personnel on the Supreme Court, getting rid of Sandra Day O'Connor and getting Sam Alito on the court. Mitch McConnell, all of a sudden, I think reading the political tea leaves and seeing how the Kansas abortion referendum had gone the wrong way, started saying, well, we're not going to introduce any abortion legislation here in Congress. I think that's better left for the states. Seems like it's an issue for the states. It's an issue for the states to decide. And a number of Republican elected officials who were feeling the heat started to take the same position for themselves. Most notably, Dr. Oz, for whom I had expressed my great distaste a number of times on Right to Life Radio. I would feel bad about this from a 501c3 perspective, except John Fetterman, his opponent in the Pennsylvania Senate race, he wasn't anything to write home about either. But Dr. Oz was running as a Republican, clearly had no idea how to articulate any kind of pro-life view, and so he just kept repeating, well, abortion's a state issue, and I'm running for the U.S. Senate, so I don't have to do anything about it. That is obviously a highly inadequate response, I think. And even I encountered myself talking with a Republican congressman who had himself voted multiple times for nationwide abortion legislation, co-sponsored abortion legislation, who was sort of trying to act like he was, this really strict federalist of some sort. And it's, oh, well, I'm not sure if that's really the proper role of Congress to pass nationwide abortion legislation. All of a sudden, we're conveniently, respecting these very fine boundaries between what is federal versus state responsibilities. Now, so I've been very frustrated at this, and I've been wondering, one, are Republicans going to try to pass any kind of abortion legislation now that they have the majority in the House? If they ever come to power again, will they try to pass nationwide restrictions on abortion? And we've been highlighting on this show all the ways in which, yes, the Dobbs decision turns over to the legislatures the ability, including state legislatures, the ability to regulate abortion. It's still a federal issue. When you've got the Biden administration saying the abortion prescriptions for the abortion pill can be picked up from CVS and Walgreens, when the Biden administration is saying abortion pills can be shipped through the mail and the U.S. Postal Service is going to keep shipping them through the mail, even if it's to a state that outlaws abortion like Texas does, or any number of pro-life states now. It's a federal issue. It does not matter. You can. There's only so much you can hide. I mean, it's so clearly still a federal issue. Abortion is a major business. It has companies that operate in various states to provide abortion services. Healthcare is a national industry. This is a nationwide business. This is a nationwide thing. When you've got states like California offering grants to people in pro-life states so that they can come to California to have abortions, when you've got huge nationwide businesses offering to fly their employees to California to get abortions so that they don't have to pay, because paying for an abortion is a lot cheaper than paying for a female employee to, have maternity leave. And yet we're going to pretend like these corporations are feminist. When you have that, this is a nationwide issue. It cries out for Congress to regulate it. And now that the Supreme Court has stepped back, that's an important thing to recognize. The Supreme Court saying that the Constitution has nothing... What the Supreme Court said in Dobbs is essentially the Constitution doesn't mandate anything one way or another about abortion. Regulate as you see fit. This means that if there's some aspect of the abortion question where the federal government has the ability to regulate it, is there a way that abortion is involved in interstate commerce, for example, then it's really the change is not abortion goes from being a federal issue to a state issue. The change that Dobbs initiated is it goes from being a question dealt with in the courts to being a question dealt with by legislatures, whether that's the U.S. Congress or any individual state legislature. So that's the big change. And I think Republicans in Congress have just been dying for an excuse to not have to vote on abortion questions anymore, that they immediately start rhetorically running away to this, well, it's a state's issue. It's a state's issue now. Now, I guess that's why I guess I'm a little positively surprised by these various votes in the House of Representatives, especially the vote that they just undertook on the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. So this is a nationwide piece of legislation that's, I guess it's tangential to the abortion question, but here's every single Republican in the House of Representatives voting on it, including a couple of Republicans like the one I had talked with who were sort of hemming and hawing about, is this really the appropriate place for us and as Republicans in Congress? Is this something we should really vote for? All of them voted for it. So I don't know. Maybe these guys are just doofuses, and then as soon as they get their, the party brass starts sort of saying, hey, you better vote on this. You better vote the right way on this. They just fall in line and do the right thing, which, I guess that's good. I guess that's positive. But again, it has to be a nationwide response. Because I'm just... the actions the Biden administration has taken in the last 2 weeks, just with regard to the abortion pill, have convinced me that individual states can outlaw abortion all they want, and the federal government is still, if the federal government is in Democrat hands, if the executive branch is in the control of a pro-choice president, they are going to try to find a way to make abortion accessible to people in red states. And they're going to try to find a way to not support the decisions by pro-life state legislature. I mean, you should see all these bills that California has been passing. We're not going to extradite if someone is found guilty of violating a Texas criminal statute outlawing abortion. California is not going to extradite that person to Texas, even if it's the abortion doctor or whoever. They're not going to extradite them. This is like the only thing. If someone commits, if it's a Texas person who flees to California because they committed fraud or a hit and run or a gun crime or whatever, oh yeah, California send them back, of course. So this is going to be the one kind of crime where California is just, nope, we're not going to do it. It's setting up, frankly, and Jonathan and I have talked about this before. I mean, I'm thankful for Dobbs. Obviously, Dobbs is a much better situation than what we had before. But it is really kind of setting things up in this country. It's, and I'm not saying I want a civil war. I'm not saying predicting there will be a civil war. But there are some things that are a little analogous between our situation in America with abortion and the situation with slavery prior to the Civil War, where you had some red state, you have some slave states, you have some free states, and ultimately people realized, well, this solution of some states having this massive injustice and some states not, this is too great of a tension. This is too great of a cultural problem, a cultural divide to be sustainable within one country. And there has to be some kind of federal solution. Now, I'm not calling for a civil war to be the federal solution. What I am calling for, though, is some kind of federal legislation should probably be the federal solution. Certainly the Democrats know that. Certainly the pro-choice side knows that. That's why they want to introduce and pass legislation to just codify all the stuff that was in Roe v. Wade, to make that a normal federal law, binding on everyone, overriding the laws of the various individual states. So the stakes are really high, and I think the only way this will get resolved ultimately is with some kind of federal answer, some kind of federal solution. So I guess we will see. And I'm happy that it looks like pro-life members of the House of Representatives are willing to vote on this stuff when it seemed a little bit in question before. All right, we'll wrap things up next on Right to Life Radio. I think the most annoying genre of people, I mentioned this a little earlier on the show, talking about my sort of frustration about people who have been very vigorously complaining about the possibility of gas stoves being eliminated, but don't care about major abortion legislation being introduced. The sort of particular kind of conservative commentator, and Jonathan and I always pick on Tomi Lahren for this. She's a Fox News talking head who sort of made a name for herself by saying, I believe in small government. Therefore, I don't think that the government should be able to tell you whether or not you can have an abortion. I thought conservatives believed in limited government. I want to just talk about why this is a really stupid argument. And it's an argument you actually hear from both the left and the right. Raphael Warnock, who's a U.S. Senator from Georgia, has made this argument a number of times where he tries to say, I think a hospital room is too small for a woman, her doctor, and the government. That's his argument against laws to restrict abortion. Now, Senator Warnock seems to be overlooking the massive presence of the government in every single hospital room with things like HIPAA, all kinds, the entire structure of the FDA, which governs what kind of drugs and how you prescribe them. I mean, the layers of federal and state regulation of the healthcare industry, which are very much present in every single hospital room. In fact, there are California state requirements on the size and and makeup of hospital rooms and of clinic rooms that I know of very intimately well, having been CEO of a OBGYN clinic for the last year. Trust me, the government's already there. The stupid thing about the argument, though, is this kind of libertarian idea that we believe in small government, therefore you shouldn't outlaw abortion. Unless you are a genuine anarchist, literally every single person, every single political philosophy known to man would say, if there is some role for the government, it's to protect you from acts of private violence. I don't care if you're an authoritarian communist or you're a, gun-toting Tea Party, don't tread on me, flag waving, whatever. If someone walks up to you and tries to punch your lights out repeatedly in front of a cop, the expectation is that the cop will stop this person. That is the role of government, to have some kind of cop, some kind of militia, some kind of somebody to protect innocent people from private violent activity, from criminal activity. So the bigness or smallness of government as it relates to abortion specifically is not really at play, or it's only at play if you are assuming the chief thing that's in contention, which is, what is the moral status of the unborn child? If the unborn child is a person like you and me, then of course the government should be big enough to protect him or her. Of course it should be. Government has to be big enough to protect people from acts of private violence. If you just assume, though, that an abortion has no moral difference to, say, getting your appendix removed, okay, then we can make a stronger libertarian case. If you think that the moral status of the unborn child is basically nothing, that this is a 9-month inconvenience, that this is basically a tumor growing inside of you, then okay, eliminate it, limit it. What's the government got to do about it? Is the government going to look over my shoulder to regulate my decision whether to get, my appendix removed? I mean, they are. But let's say, for the sake of argument, they don't. Okay. And that's the problem with these dumb libertarian-sounding arguments that, what the government's not supposed to, the government's so big that it could tell me what to do with my own body. Those arguments only make sense if you've already sort of answered for yourself the real thing in question, which is the moral status of unborn children. All right, that'll do it for this week. We'll see you next time on Right to Life Radio. Thank you all so much for listening.